Welcome to Tech Talk Tuesday, brought to you by Idaho Public Television and Montana PBS.
Hey, welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday. I'm Nikki Bradenberg from Montana PBS, and joining me again are
Carrie Wardle from Idaho Public Television.
I'm Micah Wallace-Spurgeon from Centerville Community School District.
And this week we're going to talk about technology frameworks. And when it comes to tech tools, how do we choose what's going to work? What tools actually lead to greater student success? And there's actually a lot of research about technology integration and the frameworks that we can use to help us make sound instructional decisions. There's way too many to discuss in our short little segment, but each of us has one that we like and that we share with teachers, and we're just going to go through those and share them with you in an effort that this is something that you might take with you the next time you go to a tech conference and you see a bunch of tools, or the next time you get one of those lists of 50 tech tools to use right now. Grab one of these frameworks and use it to make a decision about what's going to work for your kiddos. So I'll go first and share the framework that I've found the most useful. And this is called the Triple E framework. And it was in the book Learning First, Technology Second, which is written by Liz Kolb. And it's the idea that we look at a tech tool and we apply these three filters to it: engagement, enhancement, and extension. And so technology, if used appropriately in the classroom, should provide one or more of these things for students. It should be engaging, meaning they should want to do whatever the task is without getting distracted by something else. So that means you wouldn't have to make sure they're on the right tab or lock up your tabs on the Chromebook because they might toggle over to something else, because what you have in front of them is so engaging that they don't find themselves distracted elsewhere, which is a tall order for a lot of things. Enhancement, meaning it makes this experience better. We could not learn what we need to learn without the technology. It really does make the lesson more rich and provide students with opportunities for learning that they wouldn't have otherwise. And then extension means that it brings the learning beyond the classroom walls. It takes the learning outside of the regular setting and allows the opportunity to think about what they're doing in a broader, more community-based perspective. So these are some of the ways that and what I like about this is that we can just look at a tool and really identify these things. And so these are some of the big questions that you might ask about the tool. Does it provide a sophisticated understanding? Does it provide opportunities to learn outside of the typical school day? Does it allow students to focus on the task of the assignment without distraction? So some examples that I think meet all of our Triple E is the mystery location game that I had a class play in an effort to study state geography. And so the students were studying not only their state, but other states in the country. They connected with classes all over the country and played mystery location. And they took turns asking yes or no questions, trying to learn where the other class was located. And they used their critical thinking and reasoning skills to first block out the states that did not get a yes answer on a giant map. And in the process of preparing for these virtual interactions, they had to study their own state so they could answer questions about their own state, yes or no. And this allowed them to take the learning beyond the classroom because they were connecting with other places all over the country. It allowed them to kind of dig deep into their research and extend and enhance the learning. It was not just watching a video about the 50 states or reading a textbook with kind of dry paragraphs about the 50 states. And because it was kids talking to other kids, was far more engaging than if they were to just color in worksheets of the state map and write fun facts about the states because they looked them up on Google or something. So that's the example I like to give with the Triple E framework. You can get into this rubric, which we can put a link in our show description, that allows you to rate your technology with no, somewhat, or yes. And then if your technology has a certain number of points down here, then it's really high on the EEE rating. The example she provides in the book at the beginning is that she sat down next to a little boy who was doing one of those self-paced games on an iPad where he did so many exercises and he earned some coins. And then after he went through a certain number of exercises, he'd get to play a game at the end. And she realized he was just swiping and swiping and swiping and wasn't stopping on each of the pages and doing the work he was supposed to be doing. And she asked him about it. And so I'm just trying to get to the game at the end. So that was an example of a tool that wasn't engaging because he was trying to get to the part where he wanted to play, because the part at the end, that was the engaging part, the part where he got to use play and gameplay to learn. That was the part that he was really excited about. So just taking a framework or a rubric like this and putting a tool to the test and allowing yourself to see how it rates can help you start to see a bigger, more broad way that technology can be used in the classroom. Carrie, you've got one that's a little bit different, but also provides kind of a real simple way for teachers to look at technology. Which one do you like?
Yeah, so I'll share my screen here really quick, and you will notice some similarities between mine and the one that Nikki just shared with you. This isn't mine, it's one that I like, but I will just give you this full transparency, full disclosure. There are not like scholarly articles on this. Okay, this is just sort of one guy's framework. You'll notice though that a lot of it is very similar to the EEE. And so there have been some criticisms, partly that, which is why I love the EEE as well, partly that this focuses solely on technology and not on learning objectives. So always I'll just remind you to keep the learning objective in mind regardless. But I like this because I am a linear kind of person. And so this is one of those things that really, when I began kind of integrating technology, so right at the beginning, this was a helpful thing for me to just look at and go, oh, okay, here's where I am. So the SAMR model is one example of a model. And again, you'll notice some of the similar things where the first sort of bottom rung is substitution, which we'll talk about each of these a little bit, but basically where the technology basically is just a direct substitute. There's no real functional change. And then you get to augmentation and modification and redefinition. And so when we are looking at each of these steps, we just talked about this, where substitution is just that you directly substitute it for a more traditional model. So an example of that is, rather than students reading a story or article out of the textbook, or that you printed and copied and handed out, they're reading a PDF version, right? That doesn't, so it's basically just you're substituting one thing for another. And then the next sort of, just a question that you can ask yourself with this one is, what do we stand to gain by replacing the traditional tools with technology? So substitution isn't necessarily a bad thing. We don't want to live there all the time, right? And I think of it often like sort of the blooms, right? You gotta start somewhere, and it's okay to be in those bottom rungs a little bit, but our goal is to get up higher, right? And so sometimes the only thing that I gained was I didn't have to make copies, right? So if I want to give my kids a PDF instead of 50 copies of something, that was the thing that I gained, and so I gained time. So that's totally fine, right? Like sometimes we just need to substitute, because I didn't have to spend an hour unjamming the copier and figuring out how many copies I needed and then copying it, right? So sometimes that's what you gain. The next sort of step up is augmentation, where it's substituted, but it's directly enhanced. And so one example of that is, this is why I love to read ebooks. One example is an ebook, right? So you're still substituting a book for a traditional book, but the benefit of an ebook is that I can tap on a word and it'll define it for me right there, right? I don't have to go out and find a dictionary. I can bookmark the page. Sometimes you can make notes and things like that. And so that's an example of augmenting. An ebook is still using a traditional thing, but now you're adding in. There's some ebooks where the web links are right within it, and you can click it and it takes you right out. And so you're enhancing the student's learning experience. And so the question is, does the technology increase or augment a student's productivity and potential in some way? I was a huge fan of ebooks as a teacher because my kids were way more inclined to tap a word and have it given the definition than they were as fifth graders to get up, walk across the room, go get my giant dictionaries off of the shelf, flip through and try and find, right? They just wouldn't. So what they would do is skip over the word because they weren't going to go look it up. But when you use an ebook, they were way more inclined to, hey, wait, I don't know what that word means. I'm going to look it up. And so it increases their vocabulary and their ability to understand. But then, and if you noticed on that first little kind of ladder one, these two are the transformation. And so these two, the next two are really where things start to be transformational, where technology is being used instead of a replacement. It's actually enhancing. And so an example of that is multimedia resources. So to support the reading activity. So they read about something and then maybe they create a slide deck, or they create a video, a Flipgrid video, or they do something like that that isn't something that they could do in a different way. They couldn't do it with pen or paper, right? And so now you've kind of taken the learning up to the next level and enhanced it. And then so the good question to ask yourself on that one is that does the technology significantly alter the task? And then probably my favorite is redefinition. And we are teachers who know word parts, and so we probably can figure out exactly what this means, but it's basically, and Nikki talked a little bit about this earlier, but it basically allows the students to do something that would not have been possible in any other way. And one of my favorite things that I think about that, and these are just some examples, but right after I started working for Idaho Public Television, I went into a classroom, a seventh grade, I believe, or eighth, anyway, a junior high classroom where they had been learning about China, and the teacher had a tour, a Google tour with VR goggles of Tiananmen Square. And she was taking the kids, the kids all had the VR goggles, and they were, virtually walking around Tiananmen Square. And as they stopped, the teacher was able to stop them and explain, now remember, this is the point where we discussed this leader who did this, and this is the point. And it really brought that to life for them. And there is no other way in which students would have been able to experience that, because obviously they're not going to go to China and see it in person. And while they could view it in a textbook, it's not the same. And so it really brought that to life for them. And that's sort of the example. And Nikki gave you a great one too, but that's just one of the examples that I always think of when I think of redefining. And those kids were so engaged, they were so excited, and they were like, oh, I remember when we talked about that. And so it really took it sort of to the next level. And so obviously the question is that you would ask is, does it allow them to do something that wouldn't be possible without tech? Is the tech that I'm using allowing my students to do something that they couldn't otherwise do? And that's when you reach that sort of magical sweet spot of integrating tech, when the kids are really engaged. But I think you have to start somewhere. And so starting at those lower, levels, I think is okay. So I like that as sort of a beginning, a place to begin. And it was easy for me to remember because SAMR, and then I could remember all of those things. So that's why I like that one. But I think they're all really great. And so that's just sort of a brief overview of the SAMR model.
All right, Mecca, what is your favorite tech integration framework?
Dr. Jerry Valentine from the University of Missouri created IPI, stands for Instructional Practices Inventory. And he created that around the 1997, if I remember correctly. And towards the early 2000s, he started to recognize that more and more schools were becoming either one-to-one schools or heavily involved in purchasing Chromebooks, tablets, iPads, things like that. And so he was starting to see that more and more classrooms utilize technology. And so he then created a tool called IPIT. So Instructional Practice Inventory with Technology. And so this is just a quick little check that through my work with Dr. Valentine that I created this tool, and I use it here in the classroom with teachers that I work with, as well as other districts in our area education association. So one of the things that I guess I'll start down here at the bottom. So when teachers, this is teacher led, by the way, so a group of teachers were trained in IPIT, and they go into the classroom and they do a 3 to 5 minute walkthrough, and they're looking for different IPI categories. And so as they walk in, they're looking to make sure that students are not disengaged. And so we have examples here. We want for, and this does get a little tricky. It might look like students are engaged, for example, on the computer, but if they're really watching YouTube and it doesn't pertain to the lesson at hand, and we do see this sometimes with some of our secondary students, they're watching YouTube or they're trying to find their music on Spotify. That's learning lost, and we really don't want that to happen. And so that would be IPIT category 1. And then maybe students are using technology at a low level. They're doing some digital worksheets, for example, but the teacher's not attentive to them. And so maybe the teacher's back at the desk grading papers, or they're just completely out of the room. And then the only difference here with IPIT category number 3 is the teacher's actually attentive to them. And research will show that, just having the student or the teacher's presence, if you think about being in a classroom and your teacher's clear back here with their feet kicked up on their desk or grading papers versus a teacher's working around the classroom, chances are your students are probably going to be engaged, even if it is, again, more independent, lower level activities. And then we get here up to category 4, and this is what we call teacher-led instruction. And when we add technology to that, this might be a time where teachers are using their interactive whiteboards, for example, or even just a whiteboard with a projector, and they're projecting something up on the screen, and they're using it, to go through their deck of slides, and they're just, really telling students, they're verbally directing the learning, and they're telling students, maybe about a history lesson, and just the students are being attentive to that teacher at the front of the room. And then we start to see some change sort of happening. Again, research shows us that when students are actively engaged in the learning activity, whether they're using technology or not, but in particular, if they are actively engaged with that device in front of them, they're not just watching YouTube for the sake of watching YouTube or looking up their Spotify songs or sneakily, chatting with someone through their Google Mail. But when they're truly engaged in higher order, deeper thinking, that's when we want to see students using their device to do some analysis, some problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, and synthesis. And the only difference really between category 6 and category 5 is when we add that peer verbal interaction. And that really is the sweet spot. But to be honest with you, in research that I have done over the past 5 years, it's almost it's sometimes the trickiest also. And so what I did then is I created kind of another quick check, and my hope is that everyone can see the tech use categories now, kind of a blue and a green and a pink. And so when we go into classrooms, even if we're at a 5 or a 6 or a 4, most often the tech use categories that we were seeing is word processing, using tech for math computations, media development, information search, collaboration among others, and then experience-based technology, and finally interactive presentation on technology. And so I give just a few examples of those. So if I walk into a classroom and students are using technology to produce written documents, examples might be their note-taking, on a Google Doc, or they're composing papers, again, on a Google Doc or Word. And you can probably imagine then most often, if students are producing word processing on Google Docs, it might be considered lower level, but Google Docs provides so many other opportunities to, again, sort of kick that up a notch. You know, students can collaborate on Google Docs. You can use like the Explore button, for example, and do all sorts of, you know, other note taking and adding even your own videos and things like that, where we can start to move from that lower level thinking to higher level. Math computations, you know, that's really just, you know, like, again, you know, that's pretty self-explanatory, but, you know, maybe we're starting to use spreadsheets, you know, Google Sheets again, and asking students to do some graphing and charting and things like that. Media development. Oftentimes, if we're seeing students create media, it is associated with higher order thinking. And most often, those students are also collaborating. There's some verbal things going on in the classroom, whether it is that they're editing photographs or they're creating videos or audio presentations, they're doing some computer programming or creating websites. Again, you can just imagine that those are much more higher order. Oftentimes, oops, I have a little typo here. Oftentimes when students are, you know, really just looking for research, and these are okay, because what Jerry Valentine will say is you want a balance. You know, you want to have lower level and higher level, like a 50-50 or a 40-60. When I first started doing my research, we were more at lower level activities with technology, probably about 75% of the time. So we were using technology at a higher level, about 25%. And we even had a little bit of kids in there, you know, that it was disengaged. So we really wanted to kind of close that gap or start to see a balance. So it really is okay at times to have kids writing papers or doing just some information search. It's okay to have those lower level activities, but there are ways, and I think of things like, I always say this wrong, but like Diego, Diigo. You know, those are other ways that, you know, you can really start to get some collaboration and even some higher level sorts of things going on with information searches. Collaborating among others, using Google Hangouts. We probably all have been, you know, getting very good at using Zoom, even some Skyping. I also think about like our back channels, you know, that might take place during some of the wonderful like fishbowl activities that we've had. Experience-based, kids love game-based software, virtual reality that we talked about just a little while ago. And there are so many opportunities for kids to create these themselves. Again, you know, allowing them to create using coding, you know, a game themselves. They love it. In interactive presentation on technology, oftentimes, and again, I kind of separated this. We will see students and teachers that might have created a deck of slides to share. That falls into interactive presentation. And one of the things that I talk about with students is, you know, using hyperlinks in those, and instead of like a linear sort of a presentation, kind of, you know, the idea of planning the ending to a book. So depending on what I click here, you know, there might be a different ending to a book. And so those are just some examples that we take a look at in the framework that we use here in Centerville. And we collect data about 4 times a year, and we get together as a faculty district-wide. We do this in small groups, and teachers use these checklists and keep track of, you know, how often am I using math computation or word processing? And over my 5 years of research, I have really found that we are still in this area of media development and communicating among individuals. We still really have some work to do. And I would say that that's, you know, pretty typical, but we use this data to really drive how we're integrating technology in the classroom.
Your teachers in your district got some training about doing these observations and these, what was that like as far as just getting that all organized? And was that voluntary or were those assigned teachers?
So Dr. Jerry Valentine came to our district again in 2017. I first was trained, and then some of our administrators were trained. While that's not really good practice, sorry, I'm not having a lot of light there. There we go. Because again, it's supposed to be teacher driven. And the idea is really, you know, for teachers to feel comfortable, not feel like it's an evaluative process, not feel like someone's coming in there and trying to do the I got you. And so we started identifying people across grades in our elementary grades. So we had at least one kindergarten, one first, one second, and so on. And then when we got to our upper grade levels, we started getting one person from each subject area. And the interesting thing is after training, every single teacher said to me, oh my gosh, it has changed my practice so much. I get it. I find myself, you know, thinking to myself, while we are a GRR district, you know, we know that there will be times where you have to do some lecturing. But if I'm standing there, you know, 22 minutes out of my 40 minutes, that's just too much. I mean, they're starting to change their own practice. And so each year we add about 10 to 12 people every year for that training. And so more and more of our teachers are getting trained. And some of them go out and they do data collection, but some of them are just, they find that it's really powerful in changing their own practice in the classroom.
I find that to be the case, you know, once teachers maybe see the SAMR model for the first time, or get to hear about the EEE or any of these frameworks. I think there's a couple others, TPAC and some others that I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. It's just the one you use, you know? And then I think what I hear is that in your district, it created a common language for teachers to use to apply to the lessons. And yeah, we're talking about technology integration and digital learning, but gosh, those practices hold up no matter what we're talking about. And so really, we're just talking about better practice in instruction.
Correct.
So I think what we're trying to encourage everyone to do in our Tech Talk today was just to let the research be your guide and find a framework or some kind of a tech integration model that makes sense to you and provides you with some language to start holding a lens up to your practice and making sure that you're using tech in a meaningful way and that the learning is in the forefront of everything that you do. So Mecca, Carrie, thanks. Great discussion. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
See you.